Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Welcome to Haunted Pill Philosophy, where we are interviewing I.J. Makan, where we discuss the problem of evil and how it actually points to God somehow.
Yeah, I will say it is interesting to have you on. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. So I did my graduate work in philosophy and at St. Mary's University in Halifax, and um, my thesis was on the problem of evil and doing the opposite
Doing
of
opposite.
um, what most people within philosophy of religion do, which is to defend God in light of evil. So that's just that. And then for I guess for work, I'm a designer. I'm a product designer, and so I did philosophy, and then I changed, and and I do product design.
That's interesting. So this paper that you wrote, it's called "Haunted by God." I found it while I was actually looking up arguments for God's existence,
Mm.
and I happened to run into it as a thesis. Um, so you want to tell a little about the paper that you wrote?
Yeah. So the gist of the thesis is that um, evil ultimately points to the existence of God, and that evil, when most conversations within the problem of evil always end up trying to defend God, trying to see if there's logical consistency between God and evil, or with Theodicies, which would be an argument for theism, by providing reasons for evil in the world. So my thesis is more that we have to understand what evil is within the problem of evil. We have to understand the nature of evil, and in direct correlation to that, we have to understand the nature of God. When we say, does God exist in light of evil? We're making two very big assumptions, and that is evil and God. And so the thesis goes to show that once we understand what evil is, and in my thesis, I defend the privation theory of evil. Once we understand that evil to be that, what we actually have is an argument for the existence of God. And God specifically would be a classical theistic understanding of God as pure actuality.
That is interesting. You defend that against stuff like what you would call in your paper theistic personalist.
Mm-hmm.
Could you make a distinction between that and what you're defending?
Yeah, the theistic, it, yeah, the theistic personalism it's kind of interesting because um, I would say the majority of theists within at least philosophy, academic philosophy, currently are are theistic personalists. And theistic personalist is a term that Brian Davies, a philosopher down in the States, came up with. And um, the definition that I go with, and following Brian Davis, is any um, any person that believes God to be a person, a personal agent, or a being, or a spirit that is non-embodied and that is all powerful, all good, and has all the perfection and has existence necessarily. So that is theistic personalism, and so that in contrast with classical theism or theistic classicalism would be that God is pure actuality. God is not a being among beings. God is not a person, or God is not a spirit that is non-embodied. God is simply that thing, if I can use that word, that thing that exists by its very essence, in that God's essence is identical to its existence. So you have these very distinct concepts of God. The classical theism has been held by almost all the major philosophers within um, Christianity within Islam, within the Islamic tradition, and also within Judaism, and also obviously you have Aristotle's unmoved mover, and that is where classical theism draws its inspiration from.
Interesting. Yeah, I always thought it was pretty interesting to learn different schools of thought within philosophy on what God's nature is. There's not so much a disagreement about the attributes of God's
Mm-hmm.
existence, but more or less just his nature.
Right.
That seems to be a disagreement.
It is interesting because when it comes to the problem of evil, if you approach the problem of evil as most contemporary philosophers do, theistic philosophers do, with the notion of God as a spirit that is non-embodied and is a personal agent and is perfect and has all the attributes, what you end up having is basically a human being that we can imagine is disembodied, and then we give all these perfect attributes to it. And so when we approach the problem of evil, you have so to give you an example, Stephen Meitzen, he's an atheist philosopher. So he has this example of God. He says, look, if I was walking, just going for a walk, and I see a child drowning, and I am an Olympic swimmer, if I see a child drowning, I have an obligation to intervene and save the child. So then he says, well, we can say that God is like the Olympic swimmer who's going on a walk, and the world is the child that's drowning in the water. And so he says, does God not have a moral obligation to intervene? And obviously his whole point is, yes, God has a moral obligation, but God doesn't intervene, therefore God doesn't exist. And I'm in agreement with him, specifically because the conception of God that Meitzen is working with is a theistic conception, a theistic personalist conception. And a theistic personalist conception of God has moral obligations, just as you and I would have moral obligations, right? I have a moral obligation not to kill my neighbor. And so if it's a theistic personalist understanding of God as a person that is non-embodied, what you end up having is a God that is, in one sense, constricted and has to follow the law that is in place. Whereas the classical conception of God, you really don't have this problem. One, because a classical conception of God means God doesn't intervene, right? The world is not a mechanistic. We're not working within the mechanistic world. The world is in existence in every single moment, precisely because God, who's pure actuality, sustains the existence and essence together, the composite of essence and existence together. So even if there are cases of evil, right? Any instance of evil requires agents that are composites of essence and existence, and as a direct result of that, you need God. So God doesn't actually, there's no obligation on God to intervene. It sounds kind of very dry and mean to some people when you say that, but that is it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you'll
So,
notice that Christians and Muslims and theists in general are fans of Aristotle and Plato, and they never prescribe any personality to God. God just does what it does.
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
especially Aristotle. Aristotle really, if you want to talk about simplicity, Aristotle was very, very simple when it came to his methodology and it came to coming to God. He didn't say Aristotle didn't, I mean, he didn't say the unmoved mover did miracles or really anything.
Mm-hmm.
So Aristotle was much more, Aristotle's God was much more limited. Well, not really limited, but it was more transcendental, you could say, than later on.
Yeah, like Plato, it's just not personal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. So The first question is
Yeah.
on page 3, you state that denying evil exists actually makes the case stronger against God,
Yeah.
stronger for atheists. Could you elaborate on that and give your argument for inferring God's existence from evil?
From inferring God's for inferring God's non-existence from evil, or
Um, well, you've said that some people have some people have tried to get around the problem of evil by denying that evil exists.
yeah.
Um, you said that actually makes the case stronger for atheism because
Hmm.
it seems so intuitively obvious that evil does in fact exist,
Hmm.
because of our lived experience. So I believe that's where I'm going with that,
Yeah.
where you say that it actually makes the case stronger for atheists when
Hmm.
you just deny the evil because you're essentially denying intuitions.
Yeah. And so I guess to kind of go a bit deeper than that would be uh, there are some theists who have said who I don't know if you consider them theists or pantheists or maybe panentheists, who have said that look, there's no problem of evil. All we really have to do is just deny that evil exists, and boom, problem of evil gone. And the reason I think that, I mean, the obvious reason I think it makes a case for atheism stronger if a theist were to deny that is that, like you said, evil is very apparent, right? We've experienced, everyone's in one way or another has experienced evil, and so to deny this very real experience in real the reality of evil kind of undermines one's epistemology would be the first thing, undermines their epistemology, and even undermines the metaphysics in such that, if you're denying something as obvious as evil, then why would we think that there are other why would we think that your general understanding of the world is correct? And so for that reason, I think denying the existence of evil as as a way to defend, as a way to get around the problem of evil is a terrible idea, in my opinion.
I think one could say that the problem of evil itself is actually more of a properly basic belief.
Mm,
It's something that we sort of we it's something like we can't really prove, and like if we're going mathematical, but we're still rational nonetheless to hold it. Sort of like the belief in the external world.
mm-hmm,
We
mm-hmm,
can't necessarily prove that the external world exists, but our lived experience confirms that it does in fact exist.
right.
Some philosophers have equated that sort of with evil,
Mm-hmm,
where
yeah.
so I think that does sort of make that little case harder for theists, I believe, to deny. Um, a second one is you note that J.L. Mackie had said that if the privation of theory of evil is granted, the problem of evil doesn't arise.
Yeah.
You say this as any evil is dependent on God at every moment because evil requires actual existing things, and actual existing things derive their existence from God. I know you went into this a little bit beforehand, but would
Mm-hmm,
you care to go in more in
yeah.
case audience may be wondering?
Yeah, sure. So J.L. Mackie, um, it was just it was a brief, like a passing comment that he made where he said, "Oh, look, if someone holds the privation theory of evil, then there's no real problem of evil for them." But he then goes on later to explain what he thinks a privation theory of evil is. But in the thesis, I note that he does make a mistake when he's trying to unpack the privation theory of evil, and he views it as a negation per se view, which would be so. I guess to clarify what I mean by privation theory before going deeper is privation theory of evil states that evil is that which evil is anything that is lacking. The evil is anything proper that is lacking in the nature. So, you know, I, for example, let's say I'm blind. Blindness is evil because the ability to see is something innate in me as a human being, and so the privation theory states that look, evil is anything that is lacking, any good that is lacking that ought to be there. Whereas the negation theory of evil just simply states that evil is anything that is lacking, full stop. So, you and I, all three of us, we can't, we can run, we can walk. Hopefully we can run, we can walk, we can jump, but we can't fly. Whereas on the negation theory of evil, the fact that we aren't able to fly would be evil because, flying is obviously way better than being able to run. So going back to Mackey, so Mackey understands the privation theory of evil as a negation theory, negation per se theory. But even then, his point that the privation theory of evil, if one holds to that, there's no problem evil. The more fundamental argument for that is, so with any evil, right? Any real evil that we're talking about, there are two things there's one main thing required for there to be evil in the world. And that is simply you need an X that is in existence. An X can be any natural kind, so it can be an animal, a tree, human beings, and generally human beings are what we are referring to when we're talking about the problem of evil, and now animal suffering, of course. So evil, because evil requires these agents, these X's, right, that for there to be evil in the world, what ends up happening is you have to first understand what evil is, which I think is best understood within the privation theory of evil. And then as a result of that, you then are able to deduce from that evil requires these X's in reality for there to be real evils in the world. And from there, what ends up happening is when we actually analyze X's, these X's in the world, these natural kinds, you find that these X's have their essence and their existence distinct, real distinct features, as real distinct features. And if you have something as fundamental as their essence and their existence as real distinct features in the world, the question becomes, well, if they are truly distinct, if one's essence, if my existence and my essence are really distinct from myself, what is holding my essence and existence together at every instance? And the answer to that is that you metaphysically require a thing that has their essence and existence identical to each other. So their essence and existence aren't distinct. And so what you have, what I call a bottom-up argument for the existence of God from evil. So you have evil, and then you have these X's that suffer evil, and then the moment you have these X's that suffer evil, you require pure actuality or God. And so you have this argument, and that's that's what I was getting at when I was mentioning J.L. Mackey's, and in that he was saying something fundamentally true.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you have anything to add, Codes or Carlos?
Who are they?
Who are what?
Who are they?
Say something, man.
Your paper is actually unique in the sense that you go after theistic responses to the problem of evil, such as the soul making theosity itself, along with the free will theodicy and skeptical theism, and declare them to be making assumptions regarding God's existence and things that it would want. You want to go into that?
Yeah. So I mean, I probably get in trouble for some of the things that I wrote in my thesis, mainly because it's like poking what's that saying? It's like poking nest of hornets or whatever it's called. It's because
Poking the bear.
yeah, or poking a bear, I guess. It's because so you know almost all the theodicies, contemporary theodicies, they make two fundamental assumptions. One is what evil is, as we previously stated. N- it's a very rare when you're reading the literature for a theist to say, hey, there's the problem of evil. We're talking about the problem of evil. So why don't we talk about the nature of evil first? Nobody ever says. They kind of jump straight into it. And, they have their reasons for that. And the second is they assume God. They assume what God is. And the other assumption is there are actually quite a lot of theological baggage that is brought in through these theodicies. And I've always found theodicies to be unsatisfactory, even as a theist, precisely because, a theodicy is an argument for the truth of theism by providing reasons for evil in the world that God's created, right? That's what a theodicy is.
Oh, you mean it's not a poem by Homer?
I wish it was. The problem is with theodicies, if you're an atheist, right? If I'm an atheist and someone provides a theodicy, the truth of, someone tries to defend the truth of theism by providing reasons for evil in a world that's created by God. Well, there are two things there's the one main thing that I'm denying, that the existence of God. So even if you provided reasons, I'll be like, oh, great. Doesn't do anything, right? I already deny a fundamental part of the argument. And so some of the theodicies, Carlos, which is not your real name, mentioned was the soul-making theodicy, right? The soul-making theodicy by John Hick. John Hick argued that, look, we can understand evil in this way, that there are evils in the world because we are imperfect creatures. We are created in a state of imperfection. It is through pain and suffering that we build our character, our virtues, and through that, God brings us into union with Him. So that's a soul making in a shell. That's the soul making theodicy. The free will theodicies, the free will defense, whichever, argues that, look, either one, evil and God are logically consistent. You can hold the existence of God and the existence of evil together, and it's not incompatible. But the free will defense, free will theodicy specifically argues that, God created humans such that He wanted them to have freedom, and that requires a libertarian freedom. Usually, it's a libertarian freedom, which is the ability to do X and not X, and not be influenced externally or internally by anything. So all your decisions are made, I guess, in the spur of a moment. And so with that kind of theodicy, the free will theodicy, you have this problem where you make assumptions about God and free will. So one would be, well, why would we even think that God would create a world such that there are, libertarian free creatures, agents out there? That's one assumption that's made. A second one was, well, why do we, why think that God is all powerful? There's no argument for that. And I know for a fact that people who defend the free will theodicies, when you bring this up, will say, well, that's beside the point. But it's not really beside the point, because we are talking about evil and God. And with the soul-making theodicy, I don't think it works, because, first of all, we know from just living that pain and suffering is character building. You can always take any sort of suffering that we go through as character building. So the soul-making theodicy, you don't really need God in the soul-making theodicy. So it ends up being not helpful at all within the discussions of the problem of evil, because all we really have to say with the soul-making theodicies, oh yes, there's evil in the world, it's character building. You don't need to defend God at all, or you don't even need to bring God in. So the thing that the section that I think it's chapter the chapter that I'm arguing is, in the chapter I'm saying, look, we don't really, we can do away with the majority of theodicies and defenses simply because either they make assumptions, a lot of assumptions about God and evil, and there's quite a lot of theological baggage that's brought in. And as a theist, I don't think it's helpful within the discussions to bring these baggage, to bring this extra assumptions without having actually argued for it.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Oh yeah. Since we're going into evil, would you please go into what is called gratuitous evil or pointless suffering?
Yeah.
And how the nature of evil is actually essential and or necessary for arguments.
Yeah. So the gratuitous evil within the problem of evil was brought in by William Rowe, and his example of gratuitous evil was, imagine there's a fawn badly burnt in a forest fire, but it doesn't die, and it suffers for a whole week until it's burned, and its pain relieves of its until death relieves the fawn of its pain and suffering, right? So William Rowe asks, is this not a case where we would say this is gratuitous evil, and gratuitous evils are evils, at least within William Rowe's argument, evils that have no reason or that can be avoided at no extra cost to God? So, the fawn that's badly burnt in the forest, William Rowe says, look, God could have easily either put it out of its misery, like that, or not even put the fawn in the forest fire in the first place. So this is a case of gratuitous evils because, one, God could have easily removed it, and two, there seems to be no good reason for the fawn to suffer. And within discussions, the gratuitous evil tends to get a lot of attention because it seems to point to something something deep about evil, that the majority, it seems like the majority of things we would consider evils are gratuitous in some sense. There are evils of people suffering from, I don't know, someone's running back home from school and breaks their leg, and then stuck in the rain, nothing happens, gets an infection trying to get back home, and then eventually dies in a week. That just seems like gratuitous evils. And so it seems to point to that sort of thinking where we could say, oh, the majority of evils in the world are gratuitous, so why are there evils in the world? And I think with that, the important thing ends up being, okay, well, we're everyone's agreeing that this is gratuitous evils, but really we can all agree on what gratuitous is, but can we agree on what evil is? Like, what is it about the fawn that's suffering, that's badly burned in the forest? What is it about that that's evil? And that's something that's not argued for, right? And often the arguments for evil, arguments for evil and against God would go, I am this might not be logically tight, but it's something along the lines of what I have down in my thesis. It would be like, evils are unwanted, we humans would do everything we can to rid the world of evil, but God is all powerful, all good, all knowing. Therefore, if if God wants, God could God could rid the world of evils in the world, but there are evils, for God doesn't exist, right? That's the general gist of most problem of evil arguments against God. But and with William Rowe's argument, it's the addition of gratuitous in front of the evils, right? So gratuitous evils are unwanted. We humans would do everything we can possibly do to rid the world of gratuitous evils, and God is all powerful, all knowing, blah blah blah. Therefore, if God exists, then He would rid the world of gratuitous evils in the world. But there are gratuitous evils in the world, like the fawn that's badly burned. Therefore, God doesn't exist. The problem, at least in my thinking of this, is again the lack of argument for the nature of evil. So we could, and I do this in the thesis, we could replace evils with holes, just like holes in general, like my sock hole, the hole in my socks, the hole in the donut, the hole in the wall. We could just replace it, evils, with that. So we could say something like gratuitous holes are unwanted, right? We humans would do everything we can to rid the world of gratuitous holes. God is all powerful, all knowing, all loving. Therefore, if God exists, then God would rid the world of gratuitous holes. But gratuitous holes exist, therefore God doesn't exist. I mean, that to me is very similar to the argument against the existence of God from evil. And obviously, the problem should be obvious immediately with the holes, with the gratuitous holes, because we to really see the argument from hole works, you'd have to check is against reality, right? You have to see if holes are actually the kinds of things that would work again as arguments against the existence of God. And I don't think it works. And the same is the case with evil. In my thinking.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. Yeah, so on to the next question here is that you've already went into say how it's evil for to, let's say, for you to be blind because it's innate for you to be able to see.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with that in mind, would this imply, like, let's say if you get knocked out unconscious by someone with a shovel, or you're born without self-awareness, those things would be bad as you're supposed to have those things?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, and the answer would be yes, in so far as if we're talking about human beings specifically, then insofar as John is a human being, John ought to have self-consciousness, qua being a human. So anything that impedes John from being a perfect human, and perfect here is not like the epitome of a man, or perfect just means John has everything that is required to function well as a human being, and to achieve all his telos, all his ends, right? So if John gets knocked out gets hit on the head with a shovel and goes unconscious, yes, it would be evil in such because John, qua human being, John ought to have self-consciousness. That would be, yeah. So that would be the answer to that.
Yeah, and also like just with being like, because usually humans are born without a sense of self-awareness. We gain that later on.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be an instance of evil, or would that just be like just nature?
That's a great question. That's a very good question. I don't think I've thought of it that way. And my initial response would be that um, if we're talking about fetuses or embryos, even embryos, it's not evil that they are not that they don't have self-consciousness as we fully developed, fully matured human beings do, because it would be the embryo, qua being a human being, is at the stage at which a human being should be before it reaches full maturity, right? And so, but if I weren't to hold that view, if I were not to hold that view, then I would have a problem with. I would probably say that any human being that's not fully mature is an instance of evil because they're not fully matured. But human beings, qua human beings, have to go through a process wherein they grow from, embryo to fetus to baby to child to teenager to adult. So it wouldn't be evil. I mean, that would be my initial response.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. You've been quiet for a little while, Carlos. What do you got to say?
Who's Carlos?
Speak, man.
Would you like to discuss the objections you've gotten for the privation theory and the problems with the objections? Like the ones you list in your papers were the negation view, the instinctive objection, and positive views.
Yeah. So the negation. So the main argument against the privation theory comes from pain instances, right? So let's take, say you're hammering a nail into the wall and then you accidentally whack your thumb, and then it's throbbing with pain, and we would say, oh, that's evil, X is, Mr. Brass is suffering evil right now because he whacked his finger. And so the opponents of the privation theory say, look, here's an instance wherein we say something's evil, but it's obviously not a privation because the throbbing pain is not a lacking of feeling, a sensation. It's actually a positive instance. And because it's a positive instance, it seems to go against the privation theory of evil, which argues that evils are things that ought to be there, which are not there, right? So this would be the main. This is, I shouldn't say that. This is the main argument against the privation theory of evil. But the only problem, at least, I don't think it works because we can take, for example, we can imagine a situation where there's 2 cups of tea, of tea, liquid, not tea, liquid on the table, right? One has coffee, and one has poison hemlock tea. Okay, the coffee, for example, and the coffee produces positive qualities to the agent that drinks it, and the hemlock tea also causes positive qualities. So the positive quality of coffee would be, if I drink the coffee, I become more awake. I'm more alert. Blah blah blah. I can concentrate. If I drink the poison hemlock tea, I'll get a headache. I'll get stomach cramp. But both of these instances, drinking the coffee and drinking the poison hemlock, they both produce positive qualities, positive instances, or sensation, just like when Mr. Brass whacks his thumb. But the thing is, when you look at it, we don't say that both of them are evil. We don't say that drinking coffee is evil, though we would say that drinking the poison hemlock tea is evil, right? We would say drinking coffee is good, but drinking the poison hemlock tea is evil. And that's because
one would kill you.
Exactly. One would kill you. One would cause all these headaches, stomach cramps, and then it would eventually kill you. Whereas drinking coffee, positive instance, what it does is it enhances the natural qualities within the agent, whereas the other one doesn't. So with pain instances, we could analyze it in the same lens where you say, look, a pain instance is, yes, of course it's evil, and of course it's, nobody's arguing that pain is a lack of feeling. I mean, that would be the lack of feeling would be, as Stanley Kane said, numbness, right? Numbness is lack of feeling, we would say, and that's evil too. But we say pain is evil precisely because it impedes the agent from being able to do what is natural to it in the best way. So if my thumb is injured, I can't pick up cups, for example. I can't do a lot of things with my hands that I require, right? I can't do a lot of things, and if I injure my thumb enough, then I might have to go to the hospital. I might have to stop working for a bit. I may not be able to provide for my family. There are all these instances of why. So, and the other thing is the pain instance. The pain is, anytime we suffer pain, the immediate reaction would be to find a painkiller, a pill to swallow, right? You take the pill, or I don't know what else they can rub stuff on the area of pain, but you're always looking to remove the pain, and that's because you want the normalness to come back, and so any pain instances, we could still think of it as a privation, because it is the privation of normal feeling or normal sensation. And so it is still evil because it is a lacking, or it is a deprivation of normal feeling in the agent.
Yeah. You sort of went into that in your paper, where you said you made the distinction between privation of existing and process of inducing privation.
Right.
Such as the example that you gave with cancer.
Yeah. So pain instances would be the process of inducing privation. So the privation of existence is simply just the lack of being, the lack of existence, or going out of existence, or dying, whatever it is, right? It's just lacking, the privation of existence. There's no existence anymore. Whereas the process of inducing privation is, I guess, it is the process through which you suffer evil. So one example of this would be, if I had acid and I poured acid on your eyes, right? There's obviously positive qualities happening where you're feeling pain, but we would call it evil because it is the process of inducing privation. So in the process of becoming blind, you're going through pain, where your skin's boiling, your eyes are boiling, whatever it may be. And so this distinction becomes very, very important when we're talking about pain and pain sensations, when we're talking about any sort of like positive instances of evil. And when it comes to cancer, for example, a lot of people, I mean, to give a more recent example would be, we have COVID-19, or even before that we had the the Ebola. So any of these instances of viruses, everyone's, the immediate reaction is, oh, this is evil. This is pure evil, or whatever it may be. But just like cancer and any other virus for that matter, those things are not evil in themselves. And the reason for that is, so insofar as cancer is just an abnormal cell that's reproducing at a rapid rate, insofar as that cancer exists, right, it is in existence, we would see that as a good. And good is not a moral statement. We're not saying it is morally good that the cancer exists in your brain. That's not the argument. The argument is that insofar as the cancer cells exist and it's reproducing at a rapid rate, the cancer is doing exactly what the cancer is supposed to do, and it is to produce cells at a normal rate, such that it starts impeding the area in which normal functioning is happening. So with any virus, it's the same thing can be said, where insofar as the virus is in existence, it is good that it's in existence. And again, good is not a moral statement. It's good that it's in existence precisely because it is in existence. And so with these things, what you have is things that are considered evil because what they do is they impede normal functioning in agents that it's affecting. So the cancer, if you have cancer in your brain, then it obviously impedes normal brain functioning. It impedes you from functioning well as a human being. And with COVID-19, it affects your lungs and it affects your heart. And so with these instances, they're evil precisely because they're in the process of inducing privation on the agent that's suffering it. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. This next question I want you to ask, Carlos.
Who's Carlos?
Dude, if you keep on, I'm gonna come up to your house and stick my foot up your ass.
Care to talk about the distinction between privation of existing and...
We went into that.
All
It's
right.
8.
How would you fit this view with Yahweh commanding people to do things like it does with the Canaanites? Wouldn't it be doing evil, or at least indirect evil, by wiping them from existence?
Yeah. Man, whoever wrote these questions, they're writing good questions.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, I get. So it would be similar to
Atheists love that shit.
So it would be similar to Crosby. Crosby has an argument where he says, look, if the whole universe, I guess he says Earth, I think, was if there was a meteor that came down and just destroyed everything, right? Obviously God being the one that's kind of orchestrating it, won't we say that's evil? And therefore, when we I haven't read Crosby in a while, so I could be misstating his argument. And if I am, I apologize. But I think his point was that we would say these are evil. We would say this is evil, and this is an instance where evil has happened, but no one is there to suffer evil. So in the case with Canaanites, so coming back with the Canaanites, we would say, so if, say, Yahweh in the Old Testament, he commands, if with the Canaanites, would we say it's evil? We would say it's evil, yes. So we would say, but does God cause evil? Is God the doer of evil? And the answer would be no. And the answer would be no, because one, so using what I would call the privation, what is it called? So
Privation.
it would be similar to, say there's a lion. So for a lion to exist and function well, it has to prey on the deer or the antelope or whatever it may be. So that sort of privation, I forget what the actual term is called. There's a very specific term for it. It's called evil. I think it's evil per accident. I think that's what it is. Evil per accident. So I think it's evil per accident, and it's where there are evils which are required for the proper functioning of something else. So in the case of a lion, if the lion doesn't hunt and kill and eat, then the lion will suffer. But insofar as the lion hunts and eats its prey, it's evil because the prey obviously ceases to exist. So in this case with Yahweh, my initial reaction would be that it is an evil per accident, that the non-existence of, I don't even know. I'm not too sure if I would even say that. I don't know. What I initially wanted to say was that it is evil per accident because the Canaanites were evil. They were doing bad things, and them not existing was better. But I don't think I would say that. I would have to think about it. I don't know what I would say.
That's interesting.
Because that argument is just about the only tool new atheists have when you deal with all their objections. Like, why does God let bad things happen to children? Because that's ultimately all they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
This would be the last question, which
it appears that you appeal to a tenseless theory of time, or B theory of time, where time is arranged relative to one another when you go into essentially ordered causal series. Was that intentional, and do you hold to that theory?
Again, it's a great question. So personally, right now, I would hold to an A theory of time. And so, and I wouldn't hold to a B theory of time, mainly because the A theory of time seems to do a sufficient job in explaining. So more specifically, I think I would be a presentist, as opposed to holding to growing block theory of time, or the moving spotlight theory. And so the part about the essentially ordered causal series, I'm not too sure if it does support a B theory of time, only because an essentially ordered causal series, it only states that agents within the causal series, right, are wholly dependent on the first mover, the first cause, and the first not necessarily being the first in line,
the prime mover.
The prime mover. And so I don't know if an essentially ordered causal series does support that, and I would be curious to know why you think it does support a B theory of time.
Because when you went into the whole any moment of time, like you gave the example of the swing.
Yes.
Where you would say in that example it was the Earth that was would be the first cause that's bestowing the causal relations onto the swing set that the girl is swinging in. I would say that it sounds familiar to the B theory of time, in the sense that on the B theory of time, it's been like by Curtis McCaff, and when he did this whole, he went into defending the Kalam on the B theory, where he ordered that even using the B theory of time, there still has to be a beginning of the universe. Because there would still be, because you said it's not concerned with there being, like you said, your argument could work even if there was a past eternal universe.
That's right.
And you said, like, what matters is that at this specific moment, like, that if it's in this specific moment where it's bestowing a causal power, that causal power would have to come outside the system, which is God. And I was saying that works with the B theory, because a B theory sort of indexes time, like relative to each other. For example, my birthday is August 11th, 1995. So on a B theory, it would say, we'd have 3 times: August 10th, August 11th, and August 12th. Now, while all these times are equally real, we could still say at the moment of August 11th, that began my journey outside the womb.
That's a way of putting it.
We wouldn't be denying that they're not equal. We're just saying like an index.
Okay.
So it'd be just focusing on the event instead of the entire series, like how you went into.
Okay. So let me ask this. Okay. So with this with your analysis still work with the example of an infinite series of mirrors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you take time to be the mirrors, like, because even if all the mirrors were, say, relative to each other, you would still have to have an extrinsic, the extrinsic factor, even in the relative sense, like the person's face, in order to reflect the mirrors. So, I mean, I think it does work.
Even in those fun mirror houses.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
all those
I prefer to sometimes, I like to, because that's very, I hate to be, married to one specific time.
Yeah.
Like A or B theory, because if you go for just A theory, obviously an atheist that's against the A theory will just say, oh, well, the B theory of time is true.
Yeah.
So, or, if you go for the B theory of time, then atheists could just say, oh, well, the A theory of time is true. And you defeat your argument that way. What I try to simply do is I show whether you go for the A theory or B theory of time, it doesn't really help you.
Okay.
So that's why I say, even if we grant either the A or B theory of time, we could still argue for God's existence from them.
Oh, yes. That much I would agree. Yes. I think that holds true so long as there are things in existence. It doesn't matter if those things that are in existence have existed for eternity. So long as they are in existence, so long as they are the kinds of things that have their essence in existence really distinct, then you always require God, because God is that which holds the composite of essence and existence in these things, even if they are eternal.
Yeah.
Mm.
That also, I remember that goes into William Paley's watchmaker argument, where he would show that even if you had an example of a watch that was just eternally existent, you could still infer from the watch that it was created. So the exact time that something exists doesn't matter, because even something eternal would still, if it doesn't inherently have the power to cause the world into being, it would still need an outside force.
Right.
All right. Well, we came on to an hour, right close to it. It was nice talking to you, man.
Well, it was an honor being on your podcast. I was going to ask you what your podcast is named after. Is it named after the D12 song?
No, it's Purple Pill. It's accepting the harsh realities of the red with the appeal of the blue.
Oh. Well, that's nice. That's nice. Okay, that's good. I think that's much better than the D12 song.
Tell the dear audience where
we used to be on a podcast called the Red Pill Philosophy.
Okay.
And we got out of that group, and so we just started our own and just said Purple Pill.
Red Pill Religion, regrettably, by he who shall not be named.
Okay. Red Pill Philosophy. Red Pill Philosophy was the
religion.
Okay.
Religion.
Red Pill Religion. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
More of a dark stain on our history, but at the time it was needed.
All right. So since we came up on the hour mark, would you like to give the audience a little bit more details about you, where they could find you, and what you're doing?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure. I am on Twitter at IJMAKAN. Um, I use Twitter. I'm not very good at using Twitter. I just generally retweet stuff and then make like random comments, quote retweets. I guess that's what it's called. And I have a podcast, and you can find the podcast or you can go to the website. It's Kazingram, KAZINGRAM.com. And there, it's very similar to what you guys do. Have a lot of interesting guests. And yeah, that's it.
All right.
All right. Be sure to share, like, and subscribe, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
No problem, man.